Cathaoirleach, I mean, I'm not filled with confidence after listening today. I thought there would be much more clear answers, and it seems like that the whole process is dogged by ambiguity, inconsistency and outright obstruction in terms of your attempts to deal with this within the banks, and it can hardly fill people with confidence. And I think people will really despise the way the terms common culture is used as fancy words to dress up what many of us would see as systematic fraud, collusion, and collusion to remove millions from individuals and from families. So maybe we can get to the bottom of a few things here. I just want to go to people who have been told maybe several years ago that they were out of scope. So they got the letter from the bank, they thought that was the end of it, they didn't do any more. What will those people do now? Are you advising them to go back to their banks, or what to do, or can you intervene for them?
So they're in scope. Anyone who was told previously that they were not in scope are on our insistence in that group of people, the large examination framework, they're in scope. But what I said previously about making a letter, writing a letter of complaint stands as good general advice to anybody, because you will definitely have to receive an answer from the lender in this phase if you do that. So as a protective position for yourself, that is good general default position to set.
Okay, so they write to the institution, and then the institution writes back and say you're still out of... So they can request that they be included in this redress scheme?
No, I think what we're saying is our examination is basically a reset to zero, as in everything is being re-looked at. So regardless of what a bank may have said to anyone at any time, that does not give the bank a reason to exclude that case from the examination. So all cases are being looked at. What remains helpful, though, from the point of view of the customer receiving information, is to write to the bank saying, well, can you give me, tell me where I am in this process, and so on. So I think the examination we're hoping will accelerate, and the way cases are handled. But it really has no standing within the examination, the fact that someone was told at some point they're out of scope. That it's not.
Okay, so they start the process again. They write to their bank, and they can be included in.
No, again, it's regardless of whether you write or not. They are included.
Okay.
But if they want to receive, as of today, tell us what's going on with my case, that's helpful for them to write. Because essentially the banks will, they will write to those who will receive redress and compensation. We're saying in scenarios where hypothetically there may be a cohort where we can't reach agreement, and the bank is saying we're not going to pay them compensation. We're saying we will force them to write to those customers saying, the bank has decided not to compensate you. But by the way, you can still go to the Ombudsman and But yet further, there may be other cases where there's no communication unless the customer is writing to the bank.
Okay, right. How many staff does the bank have working uniquely on this issue as it is now?
So the way it's working is we have 26 people in the bank working on this. But the way it's set up is essentially the first line burden is on the banks themselves to have sufficient staff to work through these cases. And they also have the obligation to have an independent advisor to, if you like, do quality control in their work. On our side, we have 26 members of our staff, plus we have our own advisors to help, which is essentially the challenge process, the on-site inspection process, and so on. So the bulk of the work is inside the banks, and we have that kind of auditing and inspection dimension to it.
Okay, so just the independent advisor. Who is the independent advisor appointed by?
As I say, the bank, each bank would have their own independent advisor.
Do you approve who the independent advisor is?
Yeah, yes, we do, yes.
You do.
And importantly, they are not coming from the firm that provides auditing services to the banks.
That's what I was trying to
So, you know, it's an arm's length.
Right. Have you refused
dimension.
any independent advisors that were put to you? Have you refused the appointment of any of them?
No.
No. Okay.
You know, again, yeah, no.
The very clear criteria were laid out in terms of what was expected in terms of the independent advisors before they were appointed.
So you're not concerned in any way that, because they're being paid by the bank as an independent advisor?
I know, but I mean, the nature of professional services firms is, you know, their reputation, you know, in the industry will be damaged if they were seen as kind of captured by their client. So, you know, professional services, I mean, we know...
we saw that with the auditing companies and the banks and the bank collapse and all that.
So
I want
there
to
is,
get on to a couple of other...
to extent there's remedies to that is some of the principles of, as far as you can, make sure you're not using the same firm for consulting as you do for auditing services. That's a basic conflict. But, you know, this process does rely on the professional services
And
firms.
you just need to get to a couple of things that weren't discussed briefly, but I'm not sure around the on-site inspections. How many on-site inspections have taken place to date?
So if I can tell you, I call there our assurance work, and our assurance work has been done on-site and off-site, and looking at files both in two. And as a result of that, we looked in deeply to the issues, and that crystallises the two issues that we have discussed with you, as we're very unsatisfied with some of the decisions.
Okay, but how
And
many...
there will be more, and all of that will be complete, because the system, as you've heard, depends on review by the lender, review then and oversight by their independent advisor, the central bank, using its statutory powers, our authorised officer powers. So there's a pyramid of checks, and we should be complete with every one of those lenders by Q1 2018.
I just need to really understand this, sorry, because I know we're very limited on time here. My perception of an on-site inspection is that you would go in, not notify the bank that you are coming. Is that right? Would you do that for an on-site inspection? Or would the bank be already notified that you were...
Notify them, or we wouldn't be able to get the right paperwork, the documentation, and look at the things that we want to look at.
Legally, do you have to notify them?
It's the practical perspective is this, that if we want to go in and look at a specific area of work in a particular floor in a particular building, we have to notify them, and we do, and that's the practical business of getting in to scrutinise the documentation.
I understand the practicalities around it, but legally you don't have to. Legally you could just turn up at a bank store in the morning and say, you know,
Yes.
I have from
Yes.
whatever you
No,
make,
that's
wherever you may
absolutely
get,
right.
you could do that. But
Yes.
you haven't done that to date.
That's right.
Is it something you see that you may have to do in the future if you're getting non-cooperation from...
Well, that's something we would
banks?
always consider in the right circumstances and the appropriate circumstances.
Yeah.
And it's something that enforcement would be well used to doing in that dimension of the work. But for now, the approach we have taken is to let them know that we are coming, so that the documentation and information that we need is available to us.
I'm just surprised, and I'll tell you why I'm surprised. It's because everything here smacks of being, you know, collusion by the banks in terms of making the same mistake at the same time across the same number of accounts and all of that. And to me, where there is a suspicion of collusion, then you'd imagine that there would almost be a mass, you know, not notified inspection of files that might, you know, not be available to you were you to make the arrangements to go in. And I suppose for people as well looking, you know, we've seen where before where people have been arranged to be arrested at a particular time and all of that, just in dealing with all this banking crisis. So I suppose it's just in terms of, Even just speak to that for a minute. Have you any suspicion that there may have been collusion here?
There's a couple of questions there, but
Yeah.
just in terms of records where we would be looking, so board minutes, committee minutes, where practically decisions are being taken and recorded within banks.
Are you looking at board
we-
minutes as you are now? Can I just ask you, are you right now, are you examining, or any of these 26 people examining board minutes?
My colleagues answered that already. I think that would be part of the enforcement in work, and to a degree retrospective. What I was
Yeah, but is it only the two you're looking at the board minutes? Sorry, I'm just trying to tease out this a bit.
I'm just in terms of your, I think you're concerned that there would be some degree of doctoring of records. We have been very actively looking at board decisions, at risk committee decisions, at exco decisions, and so on, and we would have a long record ourselves of those meetings already. So in terms of us undertaking a kind of a swoop in the morning to take those kind of records, then there isn't a danger of them being doctored as of today, because we have the records ourselves for those key committee, key board meetings, key exco meetings already.
That's for two banks. Yeah.
No, that's for that would be for the whole system.
Specifically to these issues, which is the team go in. Our team and some of the professional assistants that we have procured to assist us with this to get the job done quicker under authorised officer powers that the central bank have to go in, acquire information. I have confirmed that these are on notice, and we take very seriously any non-cooperation obstructing authorised officer powers. Are very, very serious matters indeed that has not arisen thus far in these two lenders, and the information that the team are scrutinising, because this is a very complicated issue underlying the examination, with many manifestations of a tracker problem. Some of them are contractual, and we look at the actual contract, the actual review that was done to make the decision about whether that's in or out. We look at all the associated paperwork. We look at all the decision making around that to come to our own view about whether we agree or disagree with that decision. If then the other manifestation of this problem is what's called a transparency issue, breach, where the contract may not have been exactly clear, so ambiguity. And then you look at all of the documentation about the time that that decision was taken, which actually might go to this level of detail, 70 influencing factors. And you would look at each one of those advertisements on television, what was done and said at the time. The team look at every one of those things to see do they accord with the decision that was made. So there's very detailed look.
Yeah. And in that 70, I think it's really interesting, are you trying to identify who was responsible within the bank?
So the team are looking primarily right now in that of the decision-making issue. The identification of the cohorts, because that's the primary driver. And all of that examination material is then brought forward into and informs the enforcement investigations, which looks at in a different way, the rule breach, the cause of them, and looks at it from a different dimension. So one informs the other.
Sorry, what do you mean by it was a primary driver in terms of the response to who? I find it surprising that you're not looking in terms of any, who was accountable for making the decision to move these people off within the banks?
No,
or was there a section?
I'm sorry, to be clear, the supervision team are primarily responsible for running the examination, and a key core focus of that is identifying correct identification of the people who are impacted by the decision. And this assurance work is focusing on that issue. And the information arising out of that results in the challenge to the substantive decision, and we've been talking about that, and also then is passed forward to the enforcement team, who have a very specific role, which is to bring forward forensic examinations about breaches of regulatory requirements, acquire all of the evidence about that, looking into very detailed then the specific underlying causes. So what you have are two complementary strands of work with complementary but different objectives underneath them, and the enforcement investigation is where then you take all of that information acquired and you go deeper again.
Okay. So in the context of that and in the enforcement, if you came across evidence that a bank official or a director or CEO had willfully and knowingly denied tracker rates or in any way contributed to this scandal, would the law allow for any individual to be arrested for theft or any other crime related to it?
I couldn't say, and I don't think it would be right for me to comment on the Theft and Fraud Act offences from the perspective of An Garda Síochána and their powers of arrest. That's a matter for them. But what I absolutely would tell you is that we would make statutory reports, as we are obliged to do, to the relevant agencies. It's a very, if I say this, it's a low evidential threshold that we would have to meet in order to trigger the need for a statutory report. It's not anything like a high burden or standard of proof. It's some objective evidence of the issue, and we always would err on the side of caution with respect to those things, and even to date, meeting and opening lines of discussion with the guards and with all the relevant agencies so that they too could assist us with making that report based on what we know, because they may know things from other dimensions that we don't, and we acknowledge that.
Just on that, is there a dedicated Garda team that's working with you, and just how many meetings have you had?
I can't talk about the guards and their dedicated team. What I can say is that we have regular liaison points with the guards, and we have met them twice specifically on this issue, but we, the enforcement team, have a very good working relationship with the guards and meet them regularly.
Okay. Have you discussed this issue with the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission?
Yes, the team has met with that agency to discuss this issue as well, and they're appraised of it.
What is the absolute deadline to the banks? Have you given a deadline to the banks? This is the time by which you have to have all of this sorted out.
So this comes back. I mean, the deadline that we could compel and back up with sanctions if it was violated were the deadlines in terms of the information gathering exercise, which concluded with these Stage 2 reports. Stage 3 and 4 are in relation to redress and compensation, as we've been discussing, is not something we can compel because it's essentially going to be voluntary by the banks. But having said that, all of our regulatory persuasive powers are to make sure it's done as quickly as possible. So there are deadlines saying we expect this to happen by date X, Y, and Z, depending on the bank. But they did comply with our deadlines for the Stage 2 reports. They all did comply. So, and we do expect these further deadlines to be met.
I think the word, I'm finished, yeah, and I really am finished this. I think the word comply is a bit ambiguous in this situation where other information has to be submitted all the time. But what penalties will be imposed for them for missing any of these deadlines?
So all the deadlines, statutory deadlines, have been met. So no penalty arises for failing to meet them. For the redress and compensation scheme, we have no power to order the compensation, but what we have is a timeline on those that we will continue to pressurise and challenge. It is in our interest, and I would suggest the lender's interest, to move this on as quickly as possible. What we have done is take the time to challenge, to make sure that the proposals made that are approved by the boards of directors of the lenders are the best that they can be, and I stand firm that we should continue to challenge the quality of that proposals. It is our expectation that all the compensation schemes will be up and running before the end of this year. Some of them will actually have been completed, and we expect them then to move through that process at pace. But it's important that they get it right, as well as they get it done quickly. We expect most of the compensation and redress to have been paid this year and into next, and we will have a further update for you in early next year.
I'm